Hey, welcome to Things I Learned Last Night. Today's topic is the 2008 financial crisis. What a great time. We talk about all the stuff that led up to it. We talk about the history all the way back to the early 1900s that led us to where we ended up in 2008. If you're not familiar, just Google 2008. So if you could do us a favor and share this episode, unlisten. Don't even listen to it yet. Just share it. That's the easiest way to help us grow a show, and it's awesome. So here is the episode.
Hey, man.
Hey, man.
I hate it when you do this. It just throws me off my groove, man. For the whole episode, I'm going to be freaking off because of that. What are you? Okay. I'm not going to lie. I saw that hat and out of the corner of my eye, I thought it was a Vietnam veteran hat.
For those listening, is a Korean War veteran hat.
No, it's an odd job hat, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can't wear other hats.
If it's on your head, it's an odd job hat.
That's
their
slogan.
Have you ever heard of the 2008 housing crisis?
Are you really going to try to do this?
Yeah, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to give it a good old college try.
Cool.
This is not financial advice. Also, this is not qualified.
This is financial advice. Anything I say is qualified by life experience.
Okay. Anyways, have you ever heard of it?
I may have had my early adulthood impacted by this.
Yeah, so this is something that we probably don't need to introduce. But if you missed it, the 2008 housing crisis.
If you're one of our younger listeners, the year before you were born,
there was something called a housing bubble, and it popped. And here's the thing: just so you know, before 2008, we all lived in a bunch of houses that were just big old bubbles. They were big, huge bubbles.
Right.
And this guy
went around with a pair of scissors.
Yeah, and he just popped them all.
And we were like, this is a crisis.
8 million homes. He was a busy man.
Yeah, and no one could stop him.
No one could stop him. He had this laugh that you could hear him coming, and it was
terrifying.
Yeah, you just hear him in the distance.
Yeah. Turns out the only thing that could stop a bad guy with a pair of scissors was complete financial collapse of the whole system.
I was going to say it was the SEC. I believe in the 70s, banks started having ideas. And here's the thing. When a bank has an idea, we should say no.
That was a side hustle my dad did. Was
being a giant bank?
Yeah. He stole people's homes. Things I learned last night. So where do we start then? We obviously don't start in 2008. That's where we end.
Yeah, we need to start at the very beginning of the story, which is the 1930s.
The ghost of...
When we came up with the idea of mortgages. Really, when we came up with the idea of homeownership. Because before then, it was pretty rare. I mean, people owned homes. But it wasn't like...
You built a home.
Yeah, you built a home. You found a place. You found an empty plot of land. And you said, I live here now.
It's pretty incredible how... Because I've been reading the economic history book.
Yeah.
And people just don't understand how poor everyone was.
It's bonkers.
In the 1800s. I mean, like, for all of history.
Yeah.
Until, like, the early 1900s.
And the early 1900s was the first era where it really genuinely wasn't. Most people were just born into the home your family always had. And it was like, how did this get here? We don't really know, but it's just always been here.
Yeah.
The people who built that home genuinely, like, that first episode of Survivor when they build the hut?
Yes.
That was how that house got there. Like,
yes.
Your ancestors got somewhere and they were like, this is where we live now. And then they just built something on it for free.
So,
kinda.
If you're in Oklahoma, go outside your house right now, do a 360, and then curse your grandparents. Because
why here?
Why here?
Yeah. And they didn't really know
Or
either.
North Dakota?
Yeah.
That's why I did a show at a college in North Dakota, and on stage I was like, I just moved to Los Angeles, and someone in the second row went, "Oh, I'm sorry," out loud.
That's annoying.
And I went, "You live here."
Have you looked around?
I said,
Have you seen
Taking a gander?
this place?
You know?
Yikes. Well, they are building the tallest building in the world.
That's
Have
in
you seen
Oklahoma.
this? Yeah.
I was saying I did that in North Dakota, but
Oh, yes.
yes, they are building the tallest building in the world in
Yeah.
Oklahoma.
They just got approval.
Because a rich person went to Oklahoma and was like, this will do.
Yeah.
Just like your grandparents.
Anyways, have you heard of the Skyscraper Index? Have we talked about this on our show? Have you heard of the Skyscraper Index?
Skyscraper Index. We've not talked about it on the show. Go ahead and briefly explain it.
So the Skyscraper Index is the idea that right before a financial downturn, they either someone proposes and begins the process of building the new tallest building in the world. And that is either like a national, so it's either I'm building the tallest building in my country, and then shortly after that process begins, that country has a financial downturn, or I'm building the tallest building in the world. Shortly after that, there's a global financial downturn. And this happened with, you can take it all the way back to the Empire State Building. My dates might be a little foggy here. The Empire State Building preceded the Great Depression, and then the World Trade Center predated the 70s crash. .com there's a handful right before the .com. Petronas Towers is the one that comes to mind, but there's a handful right before that.
Okay.
And then 2008 was Burj Khalifa. 2020 they actually
I
had
like his music.
2020 they had right before 2020 there was the Jeddah Tower, which was supposed to overtake the Burj Khalifa, but they ran out of funding halfway through. So there's half of it's built right now. And I don't remember where they were building that actually. And so
In Jackson, Mississippi.
So the idea is that if you can come up with enough funds to build the tallest building in the world or the tallest building in your nation, then there is an influx of cash in the market. That's an indicator that we're about to have a crash, is the theory.
Got it.
It's not a foolproof thing, because it's the correlation does not prove causation,
Right.
and it doesn't always happen. Sometimes have been tallest buildings in the world that have been built, and then there wasn't a crash after it. But it does happen a lot.
Were the World Trade Centers the tallest buildings in the world?
When they were built. Yeah, they were built. They were built at the same time as Sears Tower.
Oh.
And they both. I'm pretty sure they were equal size. I think.
Wow. The Oklahoma City building will be the tallest in the world?
No, the tallest in the country.
Oh, okay.
It'll be the
we're
tallest
about
in the
to have
nation.
U.S. economic.
Yeah, is the theory. Whether
Okay.
that'll happen or not, I don't know. I mean, it does look like a cool building. I'll go.
Sure.
I'll go visit it. It's going to be one of those you can live and do work and play in this building. I mean, you can do that in any building. But,
Sure.
but this is everything is in that building.
But that's what I was saying, is that people don't realize how poor the world was in the 1800s and early 1900s.
Yeah.
Because pre-1870, 90% of the world lived on poverty wages, which adjusted for inflation was less than $2 a day.
Yeah.
Right? And that would be $2 a day in today's money.
Yes.
Right? Is what they were living on back then. So I don't know, a nickel and a button. But pre-1870, 90% of the world lived like that. I mean, all of history before, not just
a few years.
All of history. There were the rich people that we know of, and then there was everybody else.
Yeah, in extreme poverty.
Now, that number in 2024 is less than 8%.
Yeah.
So that's how much we flipped that.
Yeah.
Which is still, that means there's still a lot of
stuff
people
to
in the
do.
world. Yes.
There's still a lot of people who
But
are
it is
in a bad
it is
situation.
insane the
Yeah.
amount of growth that has happened in the last 150 years.
We're in an unbelievably better spot.
When we think of early New York and the 1910s through 20s and all that stuff, these apartment buildings being built, for a lot of people, that was their first structure home.
Yeah.
Was I can rent in an apartment.
Yeah.
And that is, that's where I live now.
Yeah. Yeah. And
instead of in my tents and
yes,
little makeshift things that I live in.
Exactly. And most of those people were renters.
And that's why people flooded to the cities.
Yeah.
Because there was structures that they could live in.
Yeah. It was holy cow, I can live in a real place.
Yes.
For the first time ever.
And work in a real place.
Yes. Yeah. There was a lot. It was and still is a wild time to be alive. So in that era,
Mortgages became a thing.
There became a thing to do mortgages because up until then, you could build a home,
right?
And throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s, but you had to just pay for it in cash up front.
Yep.
Couple grand, which at that time was a lot of money. And less money, cost less to build a home now, but still was expensive, and not a lot of people had access to that kind of wealth. So the banks had an idea. Local neighborhood banks said, "Well, what if we build a loan?" They called it the mortgage to offer people the opportunity to build a home. That mortgage typically, and it was different from every bank because this was like a neighborhood bank thing that was doing this. And so, but typically it'd be a 5-year loan and you would pay monthly premiums on this loan. And then at the end of the 5-year term, you would pay the remaining balance. And so if you got a $2,500 loan, you're probably paying $40 a month. And then at the end of the 5-year term, whatever's left, probably $1,700, you're paying that lump sum payment off at that time. And so still
$2,500 loan, 5 years, $480 a year.
I just threw a random number out. I wasn't doing actual math. But you're paying a premium, so only a little bit's going towards principal, like a normal mortgage would happen.
Sure.
I don't know exactly. I didn't do the math. I'm just throwing numbers out for fun.
This is not financial advice.
As we get further in this episode, you're going to realize that's why this happened. Because everyone's just throwing numbers out for fun.
Great.
And so at the end of the term, you just made the lump sum payment for whatever the balance was on your loan. Obviously, this still excluded the majority of the population from being able to do something like that,
right?
Because you had the lump sum payment. And so after the war, the war, the American dream happened, and everyone wanted to have their own home. And so banks got clever and they created the 15 and later it turned into the 30-year mortgage, where instead of having a lump sum payment due at the end, you, through the course of that term, would pay off the entire loan. Started out with the 15 because mortgages weren't as expensive. Homes weren't as expensive at first. And then over time, as home values increased and got more expensive, they increased to 30 years. So that way, the monthly payment would be something that the average person could actually afford to make and eventually pay off their loan naturally. Here's the thing. Banks were very, very, very picky about who they gave mortgages to because they wanted to get their money back. That was the only way this made sense. It was a loan, and they earn money off of the ability of the person to pay for that entire 15 or 30 years. And so there was now a vehicle for people of pretty much any income level to get a loan. Like, it existed, but in reality, the majority of people didn't have access to a loan because the majority of banks were passing on people because they didn't trust them to pay back the loan. And so I believe in the 70s, banks started having ideas. And here's the thing. When a bank has an idea, we should say no. Hey, if you've been watching for a minute and you like this show, a great way to help out is by becoming a Patreon supporters. Our patrons get a ton of perks for their support. They get ad-free episodes a week early. They get a Discord with our hosts and producers. We do monthly hangouts. There's a way to get birthday messages on your birthday. There's a lot of great perks, but more than anything, you just help make sure that this show continues to happen forever. We never want to stop. We're going to keep doing this forever. If we have enough patron supporters, we can put our brains in those little vats and have AI pretend it's us. And so we can keep doing it long after we die. But that only happens if you support us on Patreon. So we appreciate your support. Thanks for your help. If you don't want to support, that's totally fine. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you watching this show. And
the ghost of
Timothy Dexter.
J.P. Morgan.
So in the 70s, banks started campaigning for deregulation, and it took a while, but in the 90s, they started winning these deregulation campaigns. And basically, banks for a long time had a lot of rules that they had to follow. They still have those rules, but they have been fighting to have looser and looser rules so they can play whatever game they want to play instead of playing the game that, doesn't screw over the whole population of people. And so they developed in the 70s a new way to do this. And so instead of a local bank buying or giving you a mortgage, you paying the mortgage, and then they hold it until you're done paying off the mortgage. The local bank would sell you the mortgage, and then you would start paying that local bank. And that local bank would immediately turn around and say,
sell that mortgage.
hey, bigger banks, you guys want a mortgage? And they would be like, yeah, we love that. We sick. They would.
So the smaller bank is off the hook now.
Yeah, the smaller bank pays the full price of the mortgage to the bigger bank. And the bigger bank says, if I have enough of these mortgages, then I'm spreading my risk wide enough. The majority of people are going to be able to pay this. And so if one person doesn't, I'll just repossess that and we can resell it and get our money back. And there's not as much risk if you're.
So that was a side hustle my dad did. Was
being a giant bank.
Yeah. He stole people's homes. No. When houses would get repossessed or foreclosed on, and they go up for auction, the bank pays somebody a couple grand to clean the house. Yeah. And because like the people who get foreclosed on and the bank tells it, they
rip that house to shreds.
They trash it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's somebody's job to go in. You don't got to fix anything. It's just
you just vacuum.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I helped with a couple of these, and it is not just vacuum because these people pee on the floors.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
They just take all their dog food all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. They thrash it.
They take red paint and toss it on the walls and do handprints and stuff. And you can leave that. Who cares? Yeah. But it's also like they haven't taken care of their yard in 6 years. And so
how did I not? I just had like an epiphany. I never connected that dot because I've knew that. I've heard this before.
Right.
When we were shopping for a house, there was this house that we loved this house. It was a beautiful house. The price was so much lower than it was worth. Right. And it was way bigger than what we could afford. But the hardwood floors were covered in blue paint. And the ceiling had splashes of blue paint. There was like water damage in the basement on all the walls. It was thrashed. Yeah. And we were like, man, this house is great. We love it, but it's so much work
to flip it. Yes.
Yeah. And so we passed on it. And I don't know why we just were like, man, these people are like, did they try to paint this and spill? Like what happened here? Why did we never... Because I knew that. Yeah. Interesting. That's funny.
And so the backyard, we would mow the backyard and it's like 6 feet tall. So it took 3 days to get through the backyard. Yeah. Yeah. So that was one of his side hustles.
I tell you, I've told that story, the candy shop that I worked for where I mowed that lawn with the
candy and you just go, I can have as much as I want. Yeah. Yeah, it was that.
But I told you why I got the job to mow that lawn.
You didn't want to eat any of the candy these people left.
Fair. Yeah. Same thing. So the banks would sell these out to bigger banks. Right. And the bigger bank would spread the risk really wide, and they were okay with that. Well, then the bigger banks were like, wait a second, what if we sold these? They're like, what if we also sold them? And so those banks would sell it to another bank. It would sell it to another bank. And this would go down and minimize the risk the further they would go, because they'd hold it for a little bit, get some premium payments, make a profit, sell it for a little less, and and eventually your mortgage is getting sold off for pennies on the dollar.
Which is the same thing with medical debt and student loans.
Any debt, it's doing this process.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who can trace their student loans back to a company that didn't do the proper paperwork and get their whole loans forgiven. And
that's true of any debt. Yeah, most people buying debt are pretty good about that, because obviously they know that they can lose it. But yeah, if you can find the paperwork is not,
but they'll buy $2 million worth of debt for $40,000.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they'll go try to collect the $2 million, and they know they're not going to collect the full $2 million, but they're hoping you'll settle at $700,000.
Have we talked about that church on here? Yeah. And so, but yeah, that happens. Like when I bought my house, same week, I got a notice that my mortgage had been sold to a new bank. And I remember calling my dad and being like, is this legit? Should I pay these people? Is this a scam? I didn't know. I was like, this is weird. It was fast. They don't even sit on it for a second. And so then they were like, hey, how can we make this even less risky for us? And so that's when they started creating trickier, what's the word I should use for this? I guess they're just financial tools, but they're tricks.
Yeah. Basically, they're trying to set you up that they know you're going to get foreclosed on because they can make a profit off of your loan, but then they can also make a profit on the property.
Yes. Yes. And so
they're giving you a loan that they know you can't pay back, so they can make a little bit of money on it, and then they know that they're going to get the property in the end.
Okay, so that's kind of the direction we're headed. We're not there yet. So they created mortgage-backed securities, and this again was like a way where they could protect themselves a little more. So you buy a loan from a local bank.
Are you green?
Yeah, you're green. You buy a loan from a local bank, and this is actually, they skipped a step in this graphic, but you buy a loan from the local bank. That bank then sells it to a big bank, who's probably going to sell it to a bigger bank, and that's going to happen a couple times. And then eventually that biggest bank is going to get it. One of the top 7 banks in the world is going to end up with it. And they're going to have a pool of literally hundreds of thousands of mortgages.
Right.
And what they do is they stack them into groups of mortgages, and then they sell these securities to investors on that do trade funds, like mutual funds. And they package them in with a mutual fund, and they say, look, here's a bunch of mortgages, and this fund grows.
By buying into it, you're getting a share of the interest?
Yeah, you get a share of the interest as interest payments are made.
Got it.
And because there was regulation at play, they had to package them with different quality of loans. So basically they ranked loans, and they said, here's a high level of repayment, here's a mid-level of repayment, here's a high risk of foreclosure, basically. And they would package them all together so the risk would get spread out. And there was a high level that things were going to be safe.
One package was just, they're all bad.
Yeah. And so that was a very similar vehicle called CDOs, where your asset would get bought by the bank would send it to an investment bank. It would get put into this group, either a senior, mezzanine, or equity is what they call them. Senior were really good, mezzanine were fine, equity was very, very low quality. And they would sell them off to hedge funds, insurance agencies, funds, things like that. And investors would buy it and hope that they were going to get a return on the investment there.
Right.
This worked for a little while.
So they were selling shares.
Yeah, they were selling shares in a pool of debt, essentially. Yeah. And so you're like...
They weren't selling the debt to the investors. They were just selling a share of the interest.
Yes. And so it is like investing in a stock in a whole bunch of debt. And so you got a little kickback of that interest payment every month.
Sure.
And your value slowly goes up. And this was a really smart way to spread out the risk, to make it to where now a lot of people had access to mortgages because the banks didn't have to be so choosy with who they gave.
They knew that just you having a mortgage was something that would pad their...
Yeah, they knew, the small banks knew that no matter what, I'm going to be able to sell this mortgage, so I can give you a mortgage and I don't have to worry so much about your ability to repay the full amount. I just have to know you can make some premium payments, and I don't have to know you can make it for 30 years. I just know you have to make it for 4 months until I sell it. The bigger bank only has to know you're going to be able to make it for, I don't know, however long their profitability range is, a couple years, and then they just package it with a group, and the risk is much lower. Well, as the deregulation train started moving and more people started campaigning in the government to allow them to loosen the rules for these mortgage companies, they were able to pass legislation that allowed them to start to sell subprime mortgages. And that's when this system started to get really dangerous. Right. Because it became a thing where
you have more subprime loans in a group than the high quality loans can cover.
Yeah. So the majority, up until this point, the majority of people who could get mortgages were people who were probably going to be able to pay back their whole mortgage. Like, there were people who had career jobs and they had room in their finances, weren't overburdened with debt and stuff like that. Right. And so it made logical sense that they were going to pay this back. The subprime mortgage made it to where it didn't really matter. If someone was willing to sign the paper, they could get a mortgage. And so,
just kind of what car loans are right now.
Kinda. If you could sign the paper, we'll give you the loan. Who cares?
Yeah.
Because what they know is the person giving you the loan doesn't matter. They're not gonna be on the hook for this loan because they're gonna give it to someone else, and even the person that they give it to doesn't matter because they're gonna give it to someone else, and then that person, they think they've spread the risk out wide enough that it doesn't matter if you repay because we have enough people who are going to repay. We're never going to lose money on this situation. Right. We're always going to return, even if you only return us $12.
Right.
So the subprime mortgages started moving, and a lot of
what year are we in now?
Late 90s, early 2000s.
Sure.
A lot of small bankers are saying, hey, I am a salesperson of mortgages essentially, and I get a commission on my sales, and so for them it almost doesn't matter what comes through the door. I'm going to sign off on it. I'm going to sell them the highest mortgage I can sell them. Yeah. And so someone comes through the door that can afford a $200,000 home. I'm going to be like, why don't you do $500,000? I can get you a $500,000 loan because they get a commission on that no matter what. And so there is definitely some shady, and I think there's two things going on here. I think there's shady, greedy people who are taking advantage of a system.
And there's also probably a lot of bankers, like I can think of people in Mount Vernon in my hometown who would be like, no, you're like approved for much higher. You could.
Yeah, and they think that it's a good thing.
Right.
They think it's like, why would you settle for this when you can afford this?
You could do this.
We could get you in a $500,000 home. Like, why would you not?
Right.
And a lot of people would come into banks and have a banker tell them stuff like that, and they would trust them. They'd be like, oh, this is a bank. The bank wouldn't lie to me about this, because people were like, well, the bank wants to get their money back. They didn't understand.
Will lie to you all the time.
They didn't understand the whole system behind this, because I think a lot of people, especially first-time home buyers, think when I come in and I get a mortgage, I'm going to be paying this bank back forever.
Right.
And so they're not going to give me more than I can actually give them, because that hurts them. But that's not how the system worked. And so there was a lot of room for greed and corruption to run its course, and misunderstanding to run its course.
Right.
And that started flying. Meanwhile, another very interesting thing came out in this era called the credit default swap. Have you heard of this?
No.
Basically, it's insurance on these CDOs, the debt piles. So essentially, if I am a mutual fund and I'm buying a bucket of all this debt,
yes,
I could go to AIG
and buy insurance
on all that debt. So if for some reason, which I don't think it's going to happen, but just in case, I could pay a monthly premium to this insurance company, and if 90% of the people in that debt pool default on their debt, and then that just collapses, this insurance company is going to pay me back 100% of the value. And so I'll be safe. And so these insurance companies were allowed to sell this.
Where it's like dipping into their profit a little bit, but it's making it so you guaranteed no loss.
Yeah, you're not going to lose any money. And so these insurance companies, just like banks, which maybe we should talk about this for a second. Do you know how banks work with terms of like the cash they have on hand versus the cash that they have in accounts?
Yes.
They're only required to hold 25% of the total value of the accounts that they have, because the expectation is that you're never going to have.
You're not going to have a bank run where everyone's getting 100% of their money out.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And that's why bank runs kill banks, because everybody tries to withdraw more than the bank has, and the bank's like, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And so
what they're doing, their whole business model is the $1,000 you have and you put into your savings account, they are taking it and investing it to make interest on. So that way, when you go withdraw your 1,000, they give you your 1,000 back, but they've made, an 800.
They've been investing it. Yeah. Right. Just like Starbucks.
Yes. Have we talked about that?
I don't know if we've talked about that.
How the Starbucks, when you put money on your Starbucks gift card in your account, in your app, it says you have $2.50. So Starbucks has your $2.50. You put in $10, they gave you $10 of credit.
Yeah.
Now they've got an asset, and they've got billions of dollars. They have like almost just over $2 billion sitting in the Starbucks accounts, right?
Yeah.
And they can then leverage that for investors, where they go, listen, I mean, if all comes down to it, we've got $2 billion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an asset to them.
Yeah. And so they're able to go get loans. They say, look, we have this.
Leveraged on
we can give you $2 billion if we don't pay back this loan, which is insane. And so they're essentially spending your gift card money.
It's crazy.
On other things than Starbucks. You put money in the Starbucks app that you can only spend at Starbucks, and they said, thanks, we're going to spend this everywhere else.
But honestly, like even like this, the concept of gift cards as a whole is that they fully expect you not to drain it down to the last dollar.
Yeah.
And they fully expect you to buy a $500 gift card.
Yeah.
And then you leave $32 on it. And now they've just made $32.
They just sit on that forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they can.
And they expire.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they just go, $30.
Okay, we got $32. Yeah. Yep.
And if they do that enough,
they've got a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
That's why pretty much every fast food restaurant now has an app with where you deposit funds. Because everyone saw Starbucks do that and they're like, we can do that?
They're like, that's smart. That's so smart.
Genius. So yeah, you learned something. Maybe you're learning something there. And every rich people do that just in general. Like rich people will put the majority of their wealth into market funds and things like that, and they will borrow against it. So they're living off of debt, where it's like off of loans.
Right. And that's where people are like, oh, well, billionaires don't actually have $1 billion laying around.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah. But it gives them the ability.
They can do some really cheeky stuff financially. Which is why they never run out of money. Because they can be it's
really hard to mess up being rich.
Yeah. Once you hit a certain point, it's tough to run out.
Right.
Because even if you just have like $1 million in a fund, you are making an income off of that, like off of interest on that,
right?
That you can survive off of pretty much indefinitely,
yes,
unless inflation gets ridiculous,
right?
So, anyways, money's a crazy thing, our system, and here's how it breaks.
Yeah,
and so the insurance, they were insuring all these things. And same thing as those banks. They didn't have to have 100% of the value of what they were insuring because everybody expected there's no chance that 100% of these are going to fail. Like people are going to foreclose on these homes. And so they only were required to have 25% of what they were insuring on hand. They had insured, I think it was like $3.4 trillion worth of these credit default swap or CDOs.
Right.
By way of credit default swaps. An insane number. And so we kind of have these two things that are bubbling up at the same time that are very, very dangerous. The good thing is we had a system for this to make sure we weren't messing anything up, and they were ranking agencies. And so there are a handful of ranking agencies on Wall Street that were third-party agencies. They were not a part of the banks. They were not a part of Wall Street. They were not a part of these insurance companies. And what they would do is they would get these tranches and they would look at this collection of debt, the CDO, and they would scour the paperwork and they would rate the quality of that whole tranche. And so they would say, based on everybody that's got a mortgage in here, here is our rating of the quality of this, basically like the risk rating.
Sure.
AAA was the highest you get, and then AA, A, B, double B, and all the way down that line. And so if you're an investor, you're looking for AAA rated debt obligations here.
Right.
Because you're like, that's safe. That basically means that you're not going to have a lot of people foreclosing within this. While these agencies were paid by the people selling the CDOs. That was where the money came from. This wasn't a government organization.
Okay.
They were paid by those people.
Sure.
And if they gave them a bad rating, they would go to the other one down the street and get a new rating. And so they had no obligation to do anything other than give a AAA rating to everything that came through their door. And so that's what they did.
Okay.
And so it seemed like we had a system to save this, but the system
no oversight.
Didn't do anything.
Okay.
And so there's all these AAA rated stuff, and all these investors are buying this AAA rated stuff. They think, oh, everything's going to be great. We're fine. There's no risk involved in any of this because it's AAA, and they said it is, and we trust them. Can't trust them. So
they said so.
They said so. And then,
speaking of ratings, I think it's a great time for you to leave a review if you listen on the podcast app.
To do this in a while.
Okay. Or you're like, we haven't asked them to do it?
Yeah, it's been a while.
I'm doing it right now.
That's what I'm saying. We should ask them to do it.
We should. Yeah. That's a great idea, Tim. Why don't we ask them to leave a podcast?
Good idea. Ask them to leave a review.
That's a great idea.
You can do it on any app that you're listening on.
That's a AAA idea.
Hey, yeah, rate us AAA and here's the deal. If you don't rate us AAA, we're not going to pay you. We're going to find someone else to do it. Put it in the review. And if you're on YouTube, put it in the comments. Or subscribe, you coward.
Okay.
And hit that bell icon.
Hey, thanks for being here for this episode of Things I Learned Last Night. If you want to help us grow our show, the easiest way to do that is to share it.
send this link to somebody. Be like, hey, this is a fun podcast I listened to. I would love it if you would listen to it with me, because that's probably how you found the show. Someone you know shared it with you and you were like, this is pretty good. And so it helps us a lot, and it makes it so that we can keep doing this and make episodes until one of us dies, Tim. But please share it, and I will still be here after he's long gone.
Here's what's crazy.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about this, and maybe I don't know if this we'll try it. We'll see what happens. You and I have been talking a lot about this.
We'll see what happens.
We have a plot.
Okay.
No.
Do we have a plot?
We have a plot. No, here's the thing. Here's an interesting thing we've noticed. The internet's changed.
Okay.
You used to see the stuff of the people you followed.
Oh, sure.
And now you see the stuff of the people that the robots think you want to see.
Yeah, it's almost like if you click follow, they go, okay, you've got it. And then they don't show you that person ever again.
And they're like, okay, yeah, you'll Google them if you want to see them again.
You'll remember their name.
Yeah, you'll remember them and you'll just look them up if you want to see them.
Yeah.
Following means nothing anymore, which is bonkers.
Yeah.
And so I don't know where I'm going with this other than...
I don't either.
Other than... it's a weird thing that's happening. So I hit that bell icon.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how to land that plane. I
think
it's a
where we were
strange thing that's going on.
is that it is difficult to, because of the flood of content creators and people who want to build platforms.
Yeah.
They have no interest in like building like I used to have people in my comment sections that I was like, oh yeah, I've seen these people's comments over and over, and like they're engaging with my posts, and there's still some people that I go, oh yeah, they're still here, but like, I don't even know if some of these people are seeing my posts anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we're trying to do different with our Patreon that's why we're doing group hangouts once a month. That's why we're doing this Q&A kind of stuff. Like we're responding to the Discord because we do want that, old fashioned internet community.
Yeah.
That's
we're trying to build a cult.
No. That wasn't what we were going to
Oh, sorry. It's not a cult.
Not a cult.
It's a podcast.
Not a cult.
Not a cult.
This is not a cult.
Don't tell your mom it's not a cult.
Tell your mom.
Tell your mom. No, mom, it's not a cult. It's a podcast.
Okay. And Gatorade should be thicker.
Why is this so thin? Okay. So, here's where we're at. Mortgages are too easy to get. Mortgages are put into this giant pile of debt that are supposed to be safe because it's such a big pile.
Right.
The problem is the groups that are rating them are not rating them well.
Sure.
Banks start to realize we can get away with whatever we want to get away with.
Right.
And because we can insure these, we can put whatever we want in these groups. So they stop separating them by the scale of them. They start saying, what if we just throw all the bad ones into this group? And so they have a really high risk of all failing, but it doesn't matter. We can insure it. And so they put a really bad one together, get a AAA rating on it, insure it. Doesn't matter what happens. They sell it. They know they're going to get their money back because they're selling it to investors. They sell all the shares out of it. Worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, we're going to get our insurance payment from the insurance company because we've got it.
And
insured.
also the houses.
And also the houses, yeah. And so it becomes a system where they're like, we can't lose in this scenario. They also
get a payout, and also we make money on the houses that we get.
They're also betting that because they are the biggest banks in the world, and there's so much of the world economy runs through them,
they'll get bailed out.
Yeah, that if something comes to the worst possible scenario, they will get bailed out in the bad scenario. So because they realize all this, they're like, we can do whatever the heck we want. Yeah. And so they start doing that.
Watch your mouth.
Sorry. The economy starts to take...
Gosh, dude, my legs are so white. I think I got to quit wearing white shoes. And you know what it is? It's the white table, the white shoes. Look at these things, man.
It's also you don't tan.
I guess.
If you go tanning.
I've been out on my back porch, and I've just been,
Yeah, I've seen your back porch, so there's not a lot of sun access.
Hiking.
Like you gotta create a situation where the sun can actually reach
maybe
you.
It's just the lighting in here. I usually don't feel this white. I'm so white in this room.
Just go start tanning.
No.
You could
I
be
don't
a
wanna have
tanning bed guy.
cancer.
You could be a tan bed guy. You just don't overdo it.
Tanning bed guy?
Yeah. Yeah, you like hot
Yeah.
tubs. That's a hot tubs and tanning beds go together.
Okay, speaking of tanning beds, we've talked about this before. The video rental place in my town that had
Blockbuster?
It was called
Hollywood
was called
Video.
Tan
Family
and Go Video. They had tanning beds and video rental.
Did they have the tanning beds in a separate room, or were they just in the middle?
No, it was a separate room. It's not like you're like, sorry, excuse me.
Sorry, excuse me.
Those little glasses that they wear.
Do they have screens in them? Did they have screens in those?
In the tanning beds? No.
Oh.
You weren't supposed to lay in there for that long.
How long are you supposed to lay in there?
Less than people did.
I didn't know. How long are you supposed to lay? I assumed you were in there for hours.
No. Google how long to lay in tanning. Now it's going to tell you like 0 minutes. Don't do it. This is bad. But like,
What?
is it like 5 minutes?
It's 5 to 12 minutes. You gradually increase to 12 minutes. You started out at 5, gradually increased to that. What?
Yeah, it's kind of like cold plunging.
That's insane.
You thought it was hours?
I thought it was hours. That's why I never did it. I was like, gosh, that sounds like
I don't
such a
have-
waste of time.
I don't have the
I don't
time.
have 4 hours to go tanning. Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Brent does this, and I've always just been like, where are you finding all this time, dude?
Brent Tans?
Yeah, but only like
I don't think he
occasionally.
wanted you
He
to
does
tell
it
them
right
that.
before summer. It's okay. It's just thousands of people. He knows.
I guess I could do like the tanning lotion.
And go like sit outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, just sit in your
Or like
driveway.
the self tanner. I could do the self tanner stuff.
The problem is I genuinely think the problem is your yard doesn't have a lot of sun, like direct sun.
Front yard does. I'll go out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Go lay in the driveway.
Very
Go
revealing.
Yeah, lay in your driveway.
With how busy that street is. I live in Los Angeles. Honestly, they'll go up and they'll be like, that makes sense.
People won't even bat an eye. They won't even turn. They won't even.
They won't even
yeah,
care.
they just average.
They go,
It's normal.
"Oh."
The coyotes will notice.
The coyotes will go, "Ow." You know what I'm saying? Because they're like, that's hot. And they're like, they're fat out there. They're
They're well fed. Yeah, they can't make it through a howl. They run out of breath.
It's a lot like your sentence earlier. What the? Is that why you couldn't make it through, little porker?
Yeah, I've been eating too much. Oh man. Okay, so
So nothing matters.
nothing matters.
They can
They're able to
just
do whatever they
lump
want.
stuff together.
They lump stuff together. And here's the sad thing.
They're like,
is-
we're not going to lose money either way.
Here's the sad thing. So
Somebody's going to lose money, but not us.
So the people who are buying these are putting these into funds, and these funds are mutual funds, ETFs, 401ks, pensions.
Right, which is like people's retirements.
Yeah,
Yes.
and all the majority of the like consumer who's investing into these products is not in there making the decision on what this portfolio
Right.
includes. They are just paying into a 401k or into a pension, and they're expecting one day they retire, they get it all back. While someone who's managing that fund is getting all this stuff, and even the person managing doesn't realize what they're getting because the bank's lying to everybody.
Sure.
The system was very, very sketchy, and then. The economy starts to take a downturn. Housing values start to dip just a little bit. And then people start having a difficult time paying back their mortgages. Some people begin to foreclose, and it kicks off this chain reaction where more and more people began foreclosing.
It's just because they had monthly payments they couldn't meet.
Yeah, a lot of people had mortgages that were more than what they could afford.
Sure.
And so, yeah, they started foreclosing on the homes. Kicked off this chain reaction where we had CDOs that are full of high risk loans, and those loans came due, and those people started foreclosing. And so then these CDOs failed. They called the insurance agencies to pay the insurance.
The insurance
pay back
people
for the
were
insurance.
like, we also were invested in those.
Yeah, they were like, we didn't have enough. It was greater than that value of cash that they had on hand for that.
Right.
And so they weren't able to pay that back. And so simultaneously, you saw a situation where because a bunch of people were foreclosing at once, these CDOs were crushing, the insurance was crushing, and then everybody who was invested in all these funds that were part of these things, both
Right.
the insurance and this, started crushing, and then the values of those companies on the stock market started crushing, and pretty much
When was how long was the crash?
Well, it was 2008 was the crash. We kind of started seeing like signs of these things happening in 2006, where the mortgages, people started foreclosing on mortgages, and it lasted until, technically speaking, they would say like 2009 was the end of the crash.
Okay.
But you had like kind of that like polarizing moment in 2008 where it was like, oh, this is over, and by over I mean like the economy, we're all dead.
Right.
And so,
What time of the year was it? Is what I'm saying.
let me see.
When like the crash happens,
I don't know if there was like
or it was like, okay, now we've reached kind of the
I don't know if
apex.
we had like a Black Monday moment, like the
Right.
70s had Black Monday, where it was like a one moment all of a sudden. Like I think this was kind of a gradual thing. It hit a fever pitch. I don't know when that fever pitch was. I know it was in 2008 when it like finally popped. I don't know exactly when in 2008.
Sure.
But by the end of it, 8.8 million people, and this had such a big effect. It was outside of just the U.S. It was a global thing.
Yeah.
But 8.1 million people lost their jobs. There was $7.4 trillion in stock market wealth that was lost, and $19.2 trillion in household wealth was lost as a result of that crisis. And then under the conservatorship that the government took over some of these banks cost taxpayers in the U.S. $190 billion. And then through the Fed would then do kind of a buyback program on a lot of these bad stocks and bonds, essentially,
Right.
that totaled $1 trillion to clean up this mess. And it was all essentially due to a lack of regulation and allowing the banks to do whatever they want, and them kind of finding a way to not have any risk in this game. And so they could,
Right.
they were able to grow to a level where even if they didn't have a lot of risk in the situation, they were fine. And then they found all these different tools to help mitigate a lot of the risk in that situation. And for the most part, for a long time, until the house of cards fell,
Right.
they made a lot of money doing this, and they
for
got
sure.
incredibly wealthy doing this. And the majority of the people who made these decisions are still out there running these banks.
It's crazy.
A handful of these banks did actually collapse. Lehman Brothers was the big one. They were the largest collapse of any organization in American history. But and a couple of other agencies collapsed and went out of business as a result of
Circuit
this.
City.
Circuit City was the big one. Long live Circuit City. But by and large, most of these organizations are still out there. The Fed came in and they outlawed a lot of these financial tools
Right.
that were being used in this. But in 2015, these banks started campaigning to bring a lot of them back. And since 2015, they've been winning a lot of these campaigns, and a lot of these financial tools exist again. The pretty much only thing in here that is not allowed still is subprime mortgages. You have to be able to prove that you can pay back the mortgage if you're going to
Right.
get it. But pretty much everything else within this whole system, CDOs, mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, all of them are legal again, and they're doing it. And they're doing it with everything. This isn't just a housing crisis or housing thing. It was primarily a housing thing at the time. Now it's all the debt that could exist is being lumped into stuff like this. And we're building the tallest building in America right now.
So think of that what you will.
Yeah, the 2008 housing crisis was a
We will
Crazy
see
thing.
you on the construction site when we all have to be building this building.
building that building because that's the only thing we could do.
Yeah. The only job that exists.
They're gonna franchise that, and they're gonna build one in every metro.
I think
The
they're just gonna build
same exact building.
two of them next to each other.
Oh yeah, and they're just gonna keep.
Yeah.
It's a whole city of just one of the, if 30 of these.
40 of them. Why not?
Can you imagine if McDonald's was the tallest building in any city, but it was just and you drive through and it's like, hey, that used to be a McDonald's, like we do with Pizza Hut. Like that used to be a 90s Pizza Hut.
tell.
You can tell that used to be a
You can see the
Pizza
M
Hut.
way up there.
Why did they make them that big? I don't know. There's not floors. It's just a big
They decided to
atrium.
break all the rules.
It was a 1-floor building. It was giant ceilings.
Huge.
700-foot ceilings. Can you imagine changing a light bulb in that room?
Can you imagine the light from the top reaching down to where you are? That's not how that would work.
light bulb is like a big chandelier.
And there's one
600
cord in the
foot
middle.
chandelier.
There's a little chain.
Yeah.
And you're just watching it fall.
You should move. That's going to hit you.
Fiddle off. All right, well, don't you just feel hopeful about the state of the world? You know, oh, they're going to do it again, whatever. Speaking of 2008, we have an episode about the 2008 Florida Gators, which is a little less serious and it impacted people.
It's pretty serious.
In pretty bad ways. People went to jail for this, but not the other thing.
Yeah.
So you can check out that episode. If you've already seen that episode, you're like, I've seen the entire catalog of episodes. Sharon, I've watched it, I've listened to it, like I've heard them all. You haven't heard next week's because it's on Patreon right now. So join us on Patreon. You get access to our Discord. We can hang out, make inside jokes. We do monthly hangouts. And also you can see next week's episode right now. So we'll see you next week for Things I Learned Last Night.